Welcome back to Money Mixology, everyone. As always, I'm your host, Jason. We're now 12 episodes into the new show, and I thought it would be a good time to actually go and look at some of the questions that have been submitted and see what some of the listeners are thinking, what issues they have with some of the concepts we've covered. And in doing that, I've been trying to answer some of those questions directly when people submit ones that are more personal to their life, that are very specific, kind of require a more individual answer to what they're looking for. But one of the things that was interesting and what kind of changed my plan for what we were going to cover today was there was a common theme that kept coming back up, a topic that kept getting asked in a couple of different subtle ways, but it was always around the idea of the allowance. I know I've talked about that a few times, both in the talking head style videos like this and also on the radio show with a couple of the guests. There does seem to be some interest around the allowance. Now, I did have one person who was adamantly against that concept, which is interesting, but that's fine. It's okay to have some disagreements. But most people were asking a variation of the question, how do I actually make the allowance work? What's the mechanism if my partner and I decide we want to do some version of the allowance? How do we actually kind of put it in place? Are there different tools we can use? What's the conversation like? That kind of thing. So I thought, well, okay, instead of answering a bunch of the different questions that have come through, and we may still do that at some point in the future, it made some sense to just circle around and say, all right, let's just cover this one specific topic people appear to be pretty interested in. And candidly, I do think it's a high impact strategy. There are a handful of things that I believe you can do within your financial life that will make a significant difference right out of the gates. And I do think that this is one of them because it is an option you can put in place that will immediately solve a lot of the hurdles that you and your partner may be facing. Again, most of the financial problems that people face are not lack of money. I understand those are real, but most of the time it's more the fight about utility, the value proposition of the purchases we're making. And so that disagreement can be hard to overcome. The allowance solves that. So let's just talk through a little bit about how we make that work. Before we dig into the allowance itself, it is important to take a step back and realize that the allowance is really just a subset of the budget. And I think that this is important for a couple reasons. You're going to hear me say a number of times today that the allowance is about permission. It's not a restriction, it's about permission to spend money. That is the exact same way we should be viewing budgets. And one of the areas I get a little frustrated with when I just sort of hear the common conversations around finance among my peers or among students, it doesn't even matter, anywhere in public, if I'm hearing conversations around money, we have sort of turned the budget into a four-letter word. We started viewing budgets as a negative. And it's because largely from a psychological perspective, people are mistakenly viewing budgets as a restriction tool, as opposed to what they actually are, which is a permission tool. So if you are someone who views building a budget, creating a budget, talking through a budget with your partner as a negative, you are falling into the trap of thinking that that budget restricts where you can spend money and how you can spend money. That is the exact opposite of a well-designed budget and what it does. A good budget explicitly gives you permission to spend money. That's the entire purpose. It is an exercise in you and your partner, or if you're single, just yourself, determining what you value, what your priorities are, and then specifically targeting money towards those purchases and allowing yourself permission to go do these things. And it removes so much of the anxiety from the entire financial process. We've mentioned a couple of times, but it's important to reiterate, using an example as, let's say, going out to eat. If you operate under the normal lifestyle of Americans, of the restrictive budget. Budgets are bad. They say I can't do things. What will end up happening is that you will view going out to eat as a problem, something to be avoided because you know that it's expensive. You know it's probably not doing good things for your financial situation. And so you'll always view it in a negative light, which strips it of some of the pleasure, some of the joy, some of the entertainment factor that it's designed to give you when you go out to eat with your family. Instead, if you build a strong budget that specifically allocates money for dining out, then when you do go out to eat, it has no impact on you from a financial perspective removes the anxiety, and allows you and your family to enjoy the experience for what it was meant to be. So, those kind of things can happen all down the budget lines. At each different level, you're going to have items that historically or traditionally have caused you stress. And when you're able to take a step back, build a budget that meets your priorities, it will be so much easier to remove the anxiety and then say, no, it's not only that we're allowed to do this, we've actually specifically given ourselves permission and an expectation that we will do this. So those kind of things can be really, really helpful. Transitioning over to the same concept on the allowance. The allowance is about you and your partner. So to be clear, it'd be a little strange to have an allowance for yourself. If you are a single person building a budget, your entire budget is your allowance. But if you are building a budget with a partner, the concept is that each of you is granted explicit permission to spend money however you see fit. In order to actually make this happen, to put it into action, into practice, the first step is you obviously need to have a strong overall budget. Because again, the allowance is just one line item in the overall budget. So let's start there. But once we have that, then it's sitting down and you and the partner having a specific and clear discussion around how much do we think is fair, allowable, financially sound, however you want to view it, for each of us to have as an allowance. Now, I will say a couple of caveats here. It should be the same amount. It does not matter how much each person earns at their job. You are a singular unit. All your money should be treated as a singular unit. You're all aiming for the same singular goals, right? Unified goals. So you should be treating the allowance the same way. You each get the same amount regardless of revenue sources. Okay. But once you make that decision, and it's based on, again, whatever's financially sound for your family, that decision's then made. Okay. So we choose, and we're just going to use our number, let's just say $50 a week, whatever it is. Okay. So we say we're going to get $50 a week. Now comes the piece that I think most people are aiming for when they ask the question to me about how to actually make the allowance work. What they're really asking is, how do you put it in practice? How, in real terms, what accounts do you use? That kind of stuff. You have, in a general sense, 3 possible options that I think are realistic for how to make the allowance actually go. So, number 1, you can simply have a joint bank account that each of you is given permission to spend, in this case, $50 out of per week. Okay, so you have agreed that $100 a week total is available for you, the two of you, to have fun money, whatever you want to call it. Each of you gets $50 coming out of one joint account. Number 2 option is that each of you have the joint account, and then each of you has a separate spending account, checking account, savings account, whatever you want to call it. So you would take the $100, split it in half, and send $50 physically out of your joint account to his account and hers account, or his and his, or hers, whatever it is. Each partner gets the $50 sent to their bank account. Once it reaches that account, the other person has no say, no control, who cares, do what you want with it kind of thing. The third option is to do essentially the same concept, but with credit cards. So if you're someone who's comfortable controlling credit cards, understands they have to be paid off on a monthly basis, all of the protections we have in place for using credit cards, but you want the benefit of the flexibility and getting the points, those kind of things, you can do the same kind of thing. All of the income comes into a joint bank account. Each of you has your own credit card. You're allowed to go charge, let's say, $50 per week on that credit card, and then you simply take the money out of your checking account and you pay that card off. Both of you get to do that same concept. So those are the 3 structural ways you can set up the allowance. Now, before we finish, let's just talk real quickly about what the pros and cons of each of those 3 structure types are. So if we're talking about the joint account coming in and we're going to maintain just one singular checking account and we're each going to spend $50 out of that account, the pro there, it's easiest to set up. It's also the most transparent. Clearly, all the transactions are going to go through one account. Each of you are going to get to see those transactions. So it's going to be fully transparent. Last Talking Head episode was about the financial infidelity. And we talked about how transparency is one of the really big keys to avoid that. So in this case, this particular structure is actually a positive in that regard. The negative or the con to this structure is that you still have the high potential that that utility problem will be there. It's one thing for me and my wife to agree that it's $50 per week and you can spend it on whatever you want to spend it on so that I don't get hung up on the details of what you're buying and I'll get frustrated about it. And you vice versa, don't get frustrated about what I buy. That's one thing to say. But if the money's still going into one bank account and we're seeing it, even if we've agreed to it, there's just a high likelihood I'm still going to be frustrated. And she's still going to be frustrated because whether we've agreed to the dollar figure or not, we cannot overcome our human nature of seeing the transaction itself, seeing the vendor or whatever it may be, and saying, ugh, why are we doing this? Why are we spending money on this? So that's the one drawback to that structure. The second structure that we mentioned, which is joint bank account and then each having their own separate bank accounts, think debit card, if you will. So the pro there is that it avoids the utility problem, right? We take the $50, we remove it from our bank account. It goes to the left, it goes to the right, and that $50 is gone. What it gets spent on within that account, the other person never sees, never cares about, just kind of moves on with their life. Okay, so it very much helps with the utility issue. It's sort of the quintessential way of solving and why we use the allowance to get around the utility problem. The con to that structure is that, at least in theory, if you're not careful, it could open you up to the infidelity issue, which is if one of the partners gets some sort of cash in a gift or gets a bonus from work in some way that's not like direct deposited, some other income source, money coming in, and they were to put it into their individual accounts, the main household account, therefore both partners would never see that money. And so at least conceptually, there is now a place to physically hide money, which can be a concern. So that's something we would have to take into account. The third structure of the credit card version of this type of thing has the same pros as the separate bank accounts. It's the utility solution, right? If you don't ever see the purchases, you never see the vendors, it removes the utility problem from the equation altogether. But it also then mirrors the same cons as the separate bank account, which is that transparency is lowered, which means the chance for infidelity does slightly increase in a different way here, though, because you can't, if it's a credit card and you get an extra bonus from work or something, you can't deposit that to the credit card. It doesn't work that way. It has to go into a bank account and get paid on the credit card. So you don't have an income problem in terms of transparency. You have an expense problem because theoretically, if you have a credit card with a $1,000 limit, even though the partners have agreed to a $50 per week allowance, there's nothing that's technically stopping each of them from going over the $50 up to whatever the credit card limit is. So the bank account option has an income transparency problem. The credit card structure has an expense transparency problem. In order to make sure, if you and your partner choose either the bank account structure, the separate bank accounts, option 2, or option 3, the credit card structure, in order to ensure that infidelity does not come into play, you should have an upfront conversation about how will we solve the transparency problem. And there's a few ways it could be done. Just as an example, let's say on the bank account option, you could both agree that once a quarter, I'm going to just show you my bank balance and maybe a general review of transactions where you're just looking at dollar figures, not vendors or something like that. That way you'd have a chance to say, well, the balance is, if it's less than $50, now they may be saving up to buy you a gift or to buy something special. So I guess the balance could go up a little bit, but you'd still have an idea, right? If it's been 3 months, so roughly 12 weeks, give or take, and you've been putting $50 in there, well, the most they could have is $600 at that particular juncture. Again, it's not a fail-safe way, but it's a better structure to at least be somewhat aware. Now, I want to be clear about this. I'm not requiring you to do any of this. If you trust your partner and the partner trusts you, you probably don't need to do these things. But if you do want to just absolutely ensure transparency and make sure everybody's comfortable with what's going on, you could put some steps in place like a quarterly review. If it's the credit card side, then you could do something similar. But again, you're not trying to worry about income coming in hidden, you're worrying about expenses. So if your partner just simply shows you the balance on the credit card, it can't ever be more than $50. And so if you get a statement and they owe $500 on the credit card, they've been overspending. And you would be like, hold on a second, what are we doing here? So again, there are steps you could take, but you don't want to do this in hindsight because then it sounds like the big brother sort of gotcha type police, as opposed to when we set the whole plan up, we both agreed well ahead of time that I'm going to see your credit card statement each month. You're going to see mine just so we're comfortable. And again, I fully understand that sounds very police state type thing, but it could be as simple as a 10-second check-in and then you move on with your lives and everybody knows that nothing nefarious is going on and everybody's more comfortable. So you have to figure out for your situation what level of transparency you need, what is your trust level, and if necessary, what steps can we take in place. But I would highly recommend you put those steps in place early on in the process, because then it's not emotionally tied to anything. You're not trying to accuse somebody of anything. You're just saying, hey, let's do it now when we know nothing is wrong, so that each of us feels comfortable and has no chance of being accused of something later. I would just, again, please put this early in the process. So this is how you structure out an allowance. That you can choose any of the three that make sense to you. Just recognize their strengths and weaknesses, discuss them, figure out which one makes the most sense and how you want to operate it, and then go from there in terms of sort of structurally putting things in place. Opening accounts is easy, getting a credit card is easy, those kind of things. Just make sure you have some processes kind of sitting out there that you can stick to and that both parties have agreed to in order to activate this allowance. Keeping in mind the core component to the entire discussion today, your allowance as a subset of your budget is entirely based on granting permission. You have to view these as a positive. When you start viewing these things as the tool for good, the tool for doing what you want to do with your life, it becomes so much easier to have the conversations and so much more comfortable to get used to using a budget on a regular basis and slash the allowance as part of the budget. So when you and your partner sit down, start having these discussions, start with how much do we think is fair? And then secondly, what structure do we think makes sense? And then third, based on that structure, are there certain steps we need to put in place just to ensure that the utility conversation is taken care of and the transparency conversation is taken care of? If you have those two sort of possible hurdles taken care of, then the system will play out beautifully. So I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the questions. It definitely helps me to know what all of you are interested in, what kind of topics you want me to cover, questions you have, how I can genuinely help, which is what this channel is all about. So if you have other major questions, please keep them coming. And at some point in the future, I'll do one of those quick rapid fire question and answer sessions. But until then, enjoy your day. Please come back on, it'd be Sunday morning. This Saturday's show will be about goal setting with someone who has a PhD in management and the psychology of goal setting. So please join us for that show. Otherwise, have a wonderful week and I'll talk to you later.